The Matrix Resurrections is finally out in theaters and on HBO, directed by Lana Wachowski, without the involvement of her sister Lily this time around, starring once again Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss, with newcomers Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, Jonathan Groff, Jessica Henwick, and Neil Patrick Harris. The film has had a terrific marketing campaign. First, the old website, whatisthematrix.com, went online again, was reactivated, and it featured these interactive trailers which would mindfuck people by basically reading them their current computer date and time out loud, amongst other things. Then there was that wonderful trailer cut with Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit song, just perfectly setting up the tone for building up hype. And crucially, none of the trailers really spoiled too much of the movie's plot, which I will also attempt not to do in this review, as I will talk only about the basics. So the film has two very distinct halves. The first one is essentially sort of re-establishing a new Matrix with Thomas Anderson in it, still living there, convinced that his previous life as Neo was not actually real. This part of the film I enjoyed very, very much. I thought it was an amazing deconstruction of the ideas of Matrix and the way they went into the public consciousness, the way they were interpreted and reinterpreted over again, you know, many times across the years. The movie essentially takes the fourth wall and it doesn't break it, it just demolishes it utterly and completely, and then projects itself onto it. And I'm not sure if that makes sense for you if you haven't seen the film, but I thought it was a very cool way to sort of break through the screen and discuss Matrix almost as the audience would within the film. It also feels fresh because of the tonal change. It's quite lighthearted with a bunch of jokes thrown in there, which is very new for the Matrix universe. It's very meta, it's very self-referential and very intent on tearing down the entire mythos of the Matrix. And it also, crucially, as I was watching it, I thought I'm kind of experiencing the same thing I was experiencing watching the first Matrix for the first time, where I just have no idea where the movie is going to go in the next scene. I'm not sure what's going on, I'm not sure I'm following, I'm trying to, and I'm very excited about what's happening. And then we get to the point where Neo inevitably wakes up once more, and from this point onward, I think the movie can be read in two very different ways. The first one is that from this moment on, the film is building a serious, sincere narrative on the ashes of the first half. It says, okay, we had our fun, we demolished the old ideas, and now let's try and do something new. If you read the film this way, I'm very disappointed to say that it's quite awful. The plot makes little sense, the new antagonist is underwhelming compared to Hugo Weaving, who is sorely missed, and in fact he wanted to be in this film, but scheduling conflicts prevented that from happening. The action sequences are bafflingly poorly made. I mean, just a few weeks back I rewatched the original trilogy, and especially the first Matrix film, you know, those action sequences, they weren't just revolutionary for 1999, which they were, but they still hold up to this day. They still look jaw-droppingly good. The choreography of the fights, the cinematography, the gunplay, the way music works with all of them. This new film is completely devoid of any of that. It's mostly shot with close angles, short takes, cut and mashed together to kind of mask the imperfections of choreography. It's just extremely disappointing. The movie also relies very heavily on flashbacks and callbacks and literally just showing you snippets of the old trilogy, as if it doesn't trust you to make the connections based on just the dialogue. Neo's powers are now a joke. On the other hand, though, it feels like, you know, on the other side of that equation, there are no stakes to the film. There is no sense of danger. The first one had agents as these terrifying presences, primarily Agent Smith, but the other ones as well. They could really do damage to the heroes, and in fact, large part of the crew dies by the end of the first film. And it was the sense of danger was palpable. You were afraid for the characters at all times because you sensed that this is actually serious. Resurrections is kind of afraid of building that tension. It never feels like anyone is in any danger at all, and so all the big set pieces fall kind of flat. Now, I do think that fundamentally speaking, there are some interesting concepts underneath it all, like the idea of what happened in the real world following Neo's sacrifice. I think that's very interesting, and I honestly hoped that the plot would end up focusing more on that aspect instead of the Neo-Trinity relationship. I liked what they've done with Morpheus, even though on paper it seems like just a terrible idea throughout. But you know, in execution, it's kind of a cool new avenue to explore, and I actually found myself enjoying it quite a lot. But as I say, the film just fails to follow these individual interesting elements, instead opting for a much poorer plot. And the ending is just straight up dumpster fire that feels like an insult to the original Matrix. So to go back to what I said, reading the film seriously will inevitably leave people very unhappy, as it did me. But here's the thing. I've been thinking about Lana Wachowski and how on the one hand she said that Warner Brothers wanted both sisters to do a Matrix sequel for years now, and they've been approaching them multiple times, come back, do more films. And on the other, I remember that slightly famous Twitter exchange from maybe 2 years ago or something, where Elon Musk said, "Take the red pill," and Ivanka Trump, of all people, responded, "Taken." And then Lana just came in and said, "Fuck both of you." And these two things would strongly suggest that she may have been annoyed and tired with how much the ideas introduced in Matrix were taken over by various people in often, you know, wildly different interpretations. How with the almost religious approach to reading the Matrix as this holy text. I mean, I myself have been a person who's gone on the internet and read all these crazy theories and interpretations and you know, how the symbolism and so on. And perhaps, just perhaps, Lena, thought to herself, okay, idiots, let's do another film and see how you try and put this one on the pedestal. And if you imagine that, then a second interpretation of the film becomes possible, where it actually doesn't become serious halfway through, for real, and remains a deconstructionist joke throughout its entire runtime. Like, it's just one giant prank, a false film pretending to be legit, but in reality just continuing to make fun of what's wrong with the idea of sequels, remakes, and reboots in modern-day Hollywood. The seeming misunderstanding of what made the originals great, the very stupidly Hollywood ending, the way that all the nostalgia elements are poorly used, they would all make sense suddenly. It would then have to be read as a sort of presentation on, you know, going, look, these are all the things that are wrong with commercial filmmaking these days, and we're going to show you all of those, and hopefully you'll realize this shit doesn't fly, but probably a number of people will still defend it. And it would mean that the film very much intends to be poorly made in the aspects that it is, that was its idea. You know, the biggest and most expensive prank ever pulled by Lena on the big Hollywood studios and the audience as well. Now, I've been thinking about it quite extensively since yesterday, and as much as this interpretation would please me, I don't genuinely think that's the case. I think that too many of the plot elements seem sincere and done for real, and for it all to be a joke, and you know, there's just a little too many things that seem very thought out in the wrong directions, of course, and the execution fails, but it just seems like too much work for it to be a joke. And I don't really think that Lena would deliberately try to demolish her own legacy for the sake of a commentary. But it's not completely outside of the realm of possibility. And I will say, this is the most I've ever wanted to talk to a filmmaker directly after seeing the movie to discuss what was their genuine intention behind the film. As it stands, at least for now, we have nobody to rely on but ourselves. And so I maintain that if the movie is actually meant to be read and taken seriously, which I think it probably does, unfortunately, then it is a burning garbage can of mishandled ideas and shockingly poor execution. But, and only time will tell, I think, if it is in fact a giant practical joke, then it's actually a pretty impressive one.